Well, good morning, everybody. It's Neil Foley from the Business Growth Club here. Really delighted and privileged this morning to have a good friend of mine, Matt Sykes, with me from Sales Cadence. How are you, Matt?
I'm fine, thanks, Neil. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, my pleasure, Matt, and thanks very much for agreeing to come along. A fair bit of background noise. We're in the centrum, of which is the Norwich Business Park. So you'll hear a bit of coffee going and a bit of chatter, but it's actually a good place to meet. What you're going to learn, hopefully, over the next half an hour or so is all about mindset, and the sales mindset in particular, because that's what Matt's an expert in, and hopefully some techniques and ideas that you can take away and I think probably immediately apply. Does that sound like a reasonable objective?
We'll certainly go there, Neil.
We can try, can't we?
Absolutely. Let's spend some time talking about how we can help people think about selling in maybe in a different way.
So before we get into that, just to set the scene in terms of you, I know you come from a corporate background, don't you, in some form or other? That's part of your history. Talk to me about that. Give us your history, Matt.
Pre-corporate,
yep.
Very briefly. So I class myself as a sales professional. I'm quite proud about the fact that I'm in the sales industry. I think there are a huge amount of benefits that come with that. Maybe we'll talk about that shortly. But my very first job after leaving high school, I was brought up in Thatcher's Britain, so there was no need to go and do anything called university. It was get out there, son, and get yourself a job. So I went to work in a shoe shop. My first experience of selling was an utter disaster, where I was asked not to sell shoes but shoe trees.
Ah, yeah, more money in shoe trees.
Absolutely, but trying to sell shoe trees to people that didn't see the benefit of them and couldn't understand why they were so expensive was obviously a challenge. And someone like me at 16 years old didn't have the skills and the capability. It was a disaster. But throughout my sort of early years, before I got to the world of corporate, which I found in the mid-90s, I'd experimented. I did the pyramid selling thing.
Yep.
Selling air filters and water filters. That was a disaster. I'd worked briefly in the health and fitness industry, became qualified as a personal fitness instructor, worked for myself for 12 months, had 2 clients. That was a disaster. But the interesting thing was, Neil, looking back, was there was enough evidence there to suggest I was slightly non-conformist in terms of corporate employment.
Okay.
When I started to grow up and realised that, hang on a second, I need to earn some stable income and did find myself in the world of industry, I worked for most of, I guess, best part of 20 years selling packaging.
All right, okay. Really exciting.
Oh, incredibly. Yeah, sold baked bean tins. Yeah. Actually sold paint cans, believe it.
Really?
Yeah, I worked for a large European company and the bit that I was in charge of was DIY. So it was selling paint cans, empty ones, obviously, to the likes of Crown Paints and Rock Seal and people like that. And I did that right up until 2013.
Oh, great, so a long time.
Yeah, I was 16 years frontline selling or business-to-business selling. Last job I had was a European sales director. Worked with a bunch of people across Europe, looked after a boatload of cash for my employer.
Yeah.
Quite a lot of the work I was doing was negotiating multi-million-pound contracts. So very much relationship selling. Not the selling that I found when I started working for myself, which was, okay, I've got a product, but I've got no customer.
Yeah.
I need some business. And I think that the sort of harsh reality of stepping from the world of corporate, and I'll say this in inverted commas, safety,
yes,
and into working for yourself is you've actually got to go and do something to justify your salary. And that's not to suggest that people don't justify the salary, far from it. It's just a different way of selling.
And actually a different product, though, because one minute you're selling a tin, albeit an empty tin, and now you're selling a service, aren't you?
You are, and then there's all sorts of interesting things that come into play, because the market that I was operating in was a commoditised market, and you're talking about seriously experienced professional buyers whose job it is to ensure that your product is commoditised, so they bring in competition, and most of the conversations that I can recall were based on price.
Yep.
And all of the training that I experienced in corporate was how to negotiate. And when you think about it now in the world that we work in, what a complete nonsense.
Yep.
Why would you teach anybody how to negotiate price? Why don't you teach them how to sell value? Yes. And then price kind of goes away, or at least gets smaller. So, yeah, very interesting.
So how did you make the move then? I mean, what prompted you to make the move from corporate world?
Combination of worlds colliding.
Okay.
As I said, I had this kind of this backdrop of wanting to do things for myself. I'd failed a few times, but I still had that kind of mindset. I wonder if I could try and at least succeed on my own. I found the the day-to-day corporate world quite boring. And again, don't take this the wrong way, but when you sit in airports on a regular basis and you sit in air-conditioned meeting rooms, they kind of morph into one.
Sure.
I loved the social engagement that came with working with staff and employees and people that you worked with, peers. But it wasn't enough, and then if you add into the mix, you might have perhaps people that you worked with who didn't really want you to succeed, yet you knew you were capable of more.
Yeah.
The fact that you had more to offer, but you weren't given the opportunity to show that. And then I guess the pivotal moment came when I met somebody who, at a social function, who was a trainer. He worked in the world of performance psychology, had a very successful one-man business. We got talking. I brought him into my business, and he put a one-day kind of taster session on for some of the people I worked with, and I really saw at that point two things. First of all, the content was fabulous because it really had an impact on me, and I quite liked the fact that this guy's at the front of the room. We're all kind of going, "Wow, tell us more." And I got my like that show off kind of stuff. One thing led to another. I brought him in for some more intensive training with my sales team. We were getting good results, and then I guess about 12 months after that, so I'll go back to sort of early part of 2013, he said, "I'm thinking about scaling the business, do you want to get involved with it?"
Oh, okay.
So I joined, and the business that he was trying to scale was a franchise training company, so I bought into that business, and that was the start of really working for myself, actually. So I didn't quite have sometimes people talk about, you don't quite have the IP to do it myself.
No.
So I needed that comfort blanket of somebody else.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah, but that gave me the real
Yep.
opportunity to go and start this world called self-employment.
And dare I ask, how did it go?
Probably the same answer that most people who work for themselves will give you in the first 18 months to 2 years. Absolute roller coaster.
Yes.
So what typically happens, and maybe some of your listeners have experienced the same thing, is when you step from corporate into self-employment, the first thing that you do is you go back to your list of people you know.
Yes.
And some of them take pity on you and they buy what you've got.
Yep.
Quite a lot of them, and this is the great thing about, we just don't know what we don't know. I didn't know that some of those people on my list, my go-to people, thought, hang on a second, Matt, you sell tins for a living, you don't sell performance psychology training, I'm not going anywhere near you. And of course I had no idea that was going to be the reaction. So there was quite a lot of rejection coming. And then me trying to work out, what the hell, I know this person really, really well, and they don't want to buy from me, how does that work? So lots of really early highs, so some really good income coming in, and then some big gaps where nothing was happening. But the whole experience was a very positive one. The content I loved, and I was immersing myself on a daily basis in performance psychology, which was helping me as an individual, because that was the content that I was sharing with my target customer.
Yes.
So that was an absolute benefit. I guess if there was a downside, it was because my habitual nature had been created by being in corporate for almost 20 years. There was so much of what I was doing was based on that corporate way. So I was spending a lot of time inside the business, helping the two of us try and scale it. Rather than being out there myself trying to push my own business, I was trying to create this structure to help us grow the business. And that was no one's responsibility but my own. I didn't have to do that. Because I sort of defaulted back to what we call safety.
Yes.
Safety for me was write spreadsheets, process, let's make this thing work. And ultimately, that was probably my downfall, because that training company in its own entity wasn't as successful as it could have been. So I found myself, if you like, missing the opportunity of really scaling that to where it could have been.
Okay. And from there you decided to set up Sales Cadence.
Yeah, so you learn these things as you go along, and one of the things that becomes blatantly obvious when you think about it is just stick with what you know.
Yep.
And I knew how to sell. I certainly know how to create opportunities, because my corporate background was based on developing relationships, and selling's all about relationships at the end of the day. It's trust, it's likability, and then all the other skills that you and I both know, and then that leads to opportunity. And Sales Cadence was really, okay, I love the training world. I really think this content of performance psychology is key, absolute must for salespeople, because we experience so much rejection.
Yep.
And our ability to stay on task and grow comes from how we think about stuff. Why don't I just bring the two worlds together?
Yeah, makes perfect sense.
That's ultimately what Sales Cadence does.
Okay.
It helps people perform at their mental best in the sales world.
And I know one of the words that you like is mindset. How does mindset fit within that?
So there are a number of routes which lead to the house called psychology, and whether it's humanism or behaviourism or the bit that I sort of work towards, which is the world of psychoanalytics, which basically, if you strip out all the jargon, Neil, it basically says you've got a conscious mind. So the thing that you and I are doing now, which is listening to each other, asking questions, what your listeners will be doing is listening to what Matt and Neil are saying. Does that make sense for me? That's all happening consciously. But of course, there's a massive amount of thought going on subconsciously. I mean, some of the stats that are out there, 98% of the things that we do are driven by our subconscious behaviour.
Really?
So you and I didn't have to think about sitting on these two chairs, but yet we're sitting on them. So we are effectively programming our kind of subconscious to do our daily day.
Yes.
And if anyone's read The Chimp Paradox by Dr. Steve Peters,
brilliant.
You'll get that 100%. We've got a human brain, the conscious bit, and we've got the computer, which is subconscious, and we've got this little monkey who's trying to put us off. So mindset for me is very much about that. Okay, if I think in a certain way, I'm going to get a certain feeling, and that feeling is probably going to have an impact on what I do. Okay, so if people are listening to this podcast and think, what a load of nonsense this is, what a waste of time, they'll probably be feeling quite frustrated that they tuned in, and their resultant behaviour is they might switch it off. If we flip that and say, actually someone is listening and they're enjoying the content, enjoying the conversation, they think themselves, there's going to be some good stuff in this for me, they're probably feeling quite engaged. As a result of that, they'll keep listening. They might even, I don't know, maybe take some notes or decide to go to the show notes afterwards, check out your website and understand more. So you can see how the way we think is driving what we do. And of course what we do then is creating our results in life.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about psychoanalytic psychology, though, is whatever happens, I guarantee we'll think about it.
Yes.
And of course, if it doesn't go well, we'll think about that result in a different way than if it went well.
Yeah.
Having said that, even if it doesn't go well, because let's be honest about it, life can be pretty difficult.
Yep.
You know, no one lives in the kumbaya land of think and grow rich. You've got to do stuff. And if things don't quite work out, we have the choice, if we're willing to invest a bit of time in how we think and train how we think, to think not so much about, well, that didn't work. Think more about, okay, what can I learn from that? What can I change? And I think that's what mindset means to me is I've got a whole bunch of tools up here that at the moment are there, the same as you have and everybody else in this restaurant area that we're in. How many of us actually know that if we work at them, we can actually create opportunity, and that's what mindset means for me.
And is that so? It's working on the subconscious more than the conscious.
Yeah, because what we feed in consciously on a regular basis ultimately will be dished out subconsciously in our behaviour. So again, what's really, really important for me is people recognise that this is just like selling is, just like accountancy is, just like neurosurgery is. Mindset is a learnable skill.
Yep.
What's really interesting about it as well, Neil, is that we for thousands and thousands of years we've been pre-programming our subconscious, our computer, our operating system, to have this negativity bias. You know, it goes right back to prehistoric times when we were bending down picking berries from a bush. You know, got to have a look over the shoulder to make sure the saber-toothed tiger isn't coming. And we've evolved as a species, yet we've still got that negativity bias. For Christ's sake, we live in Norfolk. There's no one more negative than the people of Norfolk.
Yeah, that's very true, isn't it?
So we've got this thing going on where our default position is, I'm fearful of that. And fear can help us, because fear stops us from doing stupid things.
Sure.
But if we want to progress, if that's our choice to progress, if we want to progress, then we've got to find a way of untraining this negativity bias and training, I don't like the word positivity, but I'll use it anyway, to training a kind of a positivity bias, which is, okay, if I think in a certain direction, and I think in that way for enough times, it takes 60 days to make a habit, so they say, if I can do something for a couple of months, you know, you think of the work that you're doing in the Business Growth Hub Club on accountability, we get people doing that on a regular basis, guess what, it becomes a habit.
Yep.
So, and I know I can create habits because I've got loads of bad ones. So if I can flip that and create good habits, where can I go with that?
So you're working, because that makes perfect sense, and you're working with sales teams, or who's going to engage?
So my sort of, if we use the phrase ideal customer profile, my business is set up to help two people. The first person that I'm helping is a sales director, and I know I can help a sales director because I used to be one.
Yeah.
And everything that I employ in my own training content I apply myself, and I know I get great results from it. So I can be really confident that a sales director who, for example, has got a sales team of, I don't know, say up to 30 people, sometimes as few as 6 or 5 or 6, any between 5 and 30 would be my ideal customer profile. And he or she is looking to support their team. He knows he's got a great team, she's got a great bunch of people working for her, but she thinks they're capable of doing a little bit more. But she wants to help them in without the stick.
Yep.
Which is, you're not working hard enough, you clowns, what's going on? She wants to help them in a more supportive way.
With their own mindset, as you're saying.
Because what she's effectively got in her team of salespeople are individuals.
Yep.
Yes, they're working as a team, but they're all individuals. And the great thing about sort of mindset is it's not a team game. It's a personal thing. It's an individual thing. And, I like to think of it as, let's make selling personal. You and I both know that sales made personally between seller and buyer.
Yeah.
But to improve as an individual, then accept the fact that you can help yourself. Yeah. Even though you're in a team of people, ultimately it's down to you. So he or she will be looking to support their sales team, and the products that we have, predominantly mindset based, but of course we do. There are 3 key areas. There's mindset, there's also ability, and then there's process. Those 3 combined ultimately creates high performance in selling.
So how do you do this then, Matt? Because I could see how you get the process.
Yeah.
Because classic sales training is we'll give you a process, handling objections and doing that. You're actually different from that, aren't you? You're saying actually we can have a system, but actually you're going to apply it individually because it's whatever's in your head. Yeah,
very much so. And what I've learned for myself over the last 4 years of working for myself is that the classic sales training bit is only a third of what you need to be successful in business. And I'm not just saying self-employment, I'm talking about anyone who's in a corporate role. You need the 2 other things. You need that ability to think in certain ways, because you can have the greatest questioning skills in the world, but if you haven't got a mindset that gets you past rejection, you might stop.
Yep.
You might be hitting off a 4 out of 10 rather than an 8 out of 10 with your next call. So you need mindset there. And then if you haven't got the process, you can be the best person at closing, and you can have a really entrepreneurial mindset, but if you don't do it every day of the week, Monday you don't get out of bed and Friday you're on the golf course.
Yep.
So those are the things. So how do we help people? We do it. I've got an acronym here called CADENCE. So C stands for clarity, and clarity really is all about what's the fundamental problem that I've got. What is it that's restricting me from improving and being my best?
And that's different for every individual.
Yeah, and this is the great thing about sales training, because the stereotypical world of sales training is we've got these sort of 7 touch points or these 7 parts of the process, and most times people will say, can we have some help on handling objections, and can we have a few closing skills? Yes. And we both know that's probably a bit of a nonsense, because those 2 things get solved if you're much better at the start.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if there's a chance of pushing back against that stereotypical world of sales training, it would be is how on earth does any sales trainer out there know what you want until we've gone through this process of clarity, which is, what's the problem that you've got? So that's the C. A stands for activity. And activity, if you think of a sales team, is they'll all be very, very busy, perhaps too busy, but what are they busy on? Where are they spending their time? So activity is crucial, and this is not a blame game, Neil. This is saying, let's look at your day, let's see where you're spending your day, and I'm talking about measurement. Measure your time, and we'll probably find that there are areas of what I call latent potential. There are pockets of time, could it be 15 minutes or 45 minutes, where perhaps you're not wasting time, but you're not spending it on what I call high return, high value.
Would the sales director not already know that?
No, because in my experience, no one measures time like that.
Really? Okay.
Very, very few.
So it's just number of calls in a day? Or?
Well, they like to get stuck on the metrics, which is number of calls they make.
Yes.
But, it's quality of call, not
yes.
quantity of call. But if it take, that's a small percentage of the sales world who are making cold calls or the boiler room time. Think about B2B organisations who've got, let's say, 50 key accounts, or how are they spending their time? They're not cold calling people.
No.
They're probably talking with customers. They're probably having meetings with customers. They're probably creating proposals. They're working on innovation. They're coming up with new products. All of those things are important to the business, and they'll all be done by a B2B sales company. But because they don't measure how long they spend on them, and they don't value whether or not they're high return, high value, they get stuck doing stuff which they're not sure is successful. It's a bit like rowing a boat. So I'm in this bay, I've got my boat and I've got my 2 oars, and over there is the island I'm going to, and I'm rowing. But before I know it, I'm going in a different direction because I haven't measured the fact that the tide is going in a certain direction and the wind is blowing me off course. So I know where I want to get to, but this kind of this activity is unmeasured, and therefore I'm not entirely sure.
And I guess that's where some of the cynic in me would say it's where you're answering emails that you've been CC'd into and all this sort of stuff, and protecting your back in the corporate world.
Yeah, I had a conversation with some guys a month ago where, by their own admission, 40% of their time, they don't know, they're not measuring it, but they feels like 40%.
Yeah.
40% of their time is spent behind a laptop, updating forecast and demand planning systems. And you think to yourself, I understand why the business wants that to happen. I'd rather they were out there creating new opportunities rather than measuring history.
Yeah. So this is an eye-opener for the sales directors as well as the individuals.
Imagine one of your members of staff, Neil, comes to you and you're the sales director, and they say, do you know what, Neil, I'm spending 25% of my time on admin. If you can take 15% of that away from me, I'll devote that on to selling stuff.
Get a result.
You just say, where do we go? Let's do that, wouldn't you?
Yeah, definitely.
But because people don't measure their time, and because sales directors or business leaders don't measure their staff's time, no one knows. Yeah. And we play this no one knows game. So that would be the A. D, diagnosis. Obvious when you think about it. And this is where I hand over the responsibility of sales training to the client. You tell me what you need to learn. It's not my job to tell you. I'll show you 15 what I call sales enablers, and you can benchmark yourself against those 15 things.
This is your traffic light system?
Yeah, it's like a heat map.
Yeah.
So they'll score themselves.
Yeah.
I've created 15 enablers which I think are relevant to today's world, because we would probably both agree that sales training hasn't changed and probably doesn't need to change in the future. Why would anything that's successful need to change? So it works. But of course there are other things that now come into play which I think that the high performance sales professional would have. I'll give you an example. Publish content. Mm-hmm. If you want to go and own the space as an expert in your industry, let's say you want to be active on LinkedIn and taken seriously, then you've got to publish some stuff.
Yep.
And whether or not you're treated or taken seriously or become an expert will be down to how you publish, what you publish. But you can go and leverage that, and you can win business off the back of it. So, but that comes from how am I any good at published content? Can I give myself a score? It's relevant to my business. So diagnosis really comes from the client, not the sales trainer.
Yep.
And then imagine a world where they say, well, now I don't need 5 of those, but I do need the other 10. Let's go there. Great. Then I'm not wasting your money on the 5. E is what we've already talked about, which is emotional intelligence. So, again, fundamental to what goes with it. The N in cadence is about numbers. I could be different, but for me, sales is a science, it's not an art. Yep. It's absolutely measurable. It goes back to the point we were talking about with activity. You've got to know your numbers, and you know in your own position as a coach and mentor and with your business that the fundamental basics are, I need to know who the customer is who's going to buy my product, because they're the ones I'm going to help the best, and I need to measure the success of how I do, and the only way I can do that is by knowing the numbers.
Do they not know the numbers already?
You'd be amazed how many people don't know.
Really?
Yeah, you'd be amazed. I mean, even
why not though? Because you'd think actually if I'm paying somebody, or I, my success and the business success is dependent on the numbers game, you'd think you'd be measuring it.
I can't disagree with you.
No.
And again, I go back to my time in corporate. I didn't know my numbers.
Didn't you?
No, because I got paid a salary every month.
Yes.
Every 31 days a piece of paper came under my door. Oh, it's got cash in it. If I sit here and do nothing, there'll be some more cash. And okay, I'm being flippant, but that's ultimately how I see things. don't get me wrong, there's a lot of great performing businesses out there that are absolutely on the numbers.
But typically people don't.
Typically people don't. Because if you know that in your, let's say for argument's sake, you're growing your business, it's lead generation, that's one of your key metrics. You know what your annual sales number is that you need to hit. You know that you're going to get a certain number of no's, so you build that in. You know you've got to meet a certain number of people to find who your target customer, you build that in. Before you know it, you know you've got to make 12 new meetings a week. Well, 12 new meetings a week is doable. If it gets me to my £250,000 turnover, if whatever that is your number, I've got to meet 12 people. Great, now I've got to meet 12 people. I could either do that in one day, I could do that in 1 hour, I could do it over 5 days. And then how am I going to do it? Well, I'm going to do 4 of them through social media, I'm going to do 4 face-to-face, and I'm going to do 4 on the phone. Then you build structure and process. But without knowing your numbers, how do you know where to start? If you don't know where you're going, how do you know when you haven't got there? Is the classic statement, isn't it?
Classic stuff, isn't it?
Yeah. But of course, the other thing about numbers, of course, is it brings what I call professionalism.
Yes.
You know, I'm running a business here, so I absolutely fundamentally know what the metrics are.
What resistance do you get from when people are talking about the numbers?
It's too difficult. I never thought of it like that. Don't know where to start. I've never been told to do this before.
Are people honest when you're doing this with them?
Some are. The good ones are.
Yes.
Because honesty is key, as we know.
Yeah.
People are honest. You can reveal so much about yourself. Some like to default and hide behind the machine that they're given. That's not my job. My job is to do this.
And is the sales director, when you're doing this training and this exploration with them, is the sales director in the room?
Some of the clients I work with, yes, because if I've got
as a conscious decision for them.
If I've got a rule with clients that I work with, it's I want the decision maker involved from start to finish.
Yes.
Top down works much better than bottom
Has
up.
to. Yeah.
So sometimes they're in the room, but sometimes because I want to try and make selling personal. Once we've got over that first initial, we're into the training process, and they've been through some of the content and delivery, and then we shift into what I call flow, which is one-to-one work. Then that's very individual.
Yes.
And then you've got to build that environment where they feel so confident in you as a trainer that they'll share their innermost secrets, because we'll come back to that word honesty again. Yeah. If someone's honest with me, I can help them.
Yep.
And they can help themselves.
Yep.
And if they're not, they can't. And sometimes you can't do that when the sales director is in the room.
Yes. Yeah, I was wondering that. Yeah.
The C is capability, and this will make you laugh because having both of us been through quite a lot of training in our careers, I sometimes liken some training to being a bit like a disguised seminar. Mm-hmm. So you'll turn up for a one-day sheep dip training session, and there'll be lots of slides, lots of video content, and you'll make some notes. You might be forced to make some notes, and then you leave, and that book never sees the light of day again, does it?
No, sadly.
And the reason why it doesn't, Neil, is because lots of training companies out there miss what I call the carrot, the golden nugget, which is transference of skill. And if I'm passionate about making sure someone comes to a training session with me, my primary objective is they leave that room at 5 o'clock with a skill, or as much as I can do so that they've got a skill. Whether they go and apply and leverage that skill, which we'll call an asset, is probably down to them more than me, but my obligation is to make sure that they leave with a skill. And really, capability is the prerequisite to learning a skill, because there's a number of layers of capability, which starts with the first one, which is why the hell am I bloody doing this in the first place? Because if you can sell yourself on why you're doing it, and you can convince yourself, and you can see the benefit and the value of why you would want to leverage this asset, then the rest kind of starts to drop into place. So you're kind of creating for people a stage gate system. And the American sales author, a guy called Jeb Blunt, talks about micro commitments. So when we're in a buyer-seller conversation, throughout the whole sales process, you're always checking with that buyer, that customer, are you still with me? Are you still passionate that you want to buy? Am I still going to solve the problem? Will this always work for you? So training works in exactly the same way. There needs to be these micro commitment checks all the way through the training, so that when they leave, I think, I've got it, Matt. You've laboured the point long enough. I now know how to ask great questions.
It's now up to me.
Now it's up to me. And that's what capability brings. And then the final letter, which is E, is execution. How do we get people out there doing it? And so much of the execution comes down to something that you've taught me which is making sure that when you engage with a client, that you agree what the metrics are to measure the success of the training. Because if you want to guarantee execution, you've got to guarantee they're going to go and do something.
Yep.
And the easiest way to do that is to agree before you start, how will we measure success?
Yep.
And if you measure it, and maybe there needs to be some sort of commercial arrangement around how that works, but if you measure it, then the chances of execution go through the roof.
So you can work, because that was a really brilliant explanation of what you're doing, which is all about mindset, really, isn't it? So you're working with sales directors, helping them with their teams to achieve something you discussed at the beginning in terms of what does success look like for them, be it increased sales, retention, repeat orders, whatever it actually is.
Yep, exactly right.
And presumably a range of stuff that could be with people.
Yeah, so if it's a bit like how do I help people get involved? Because again, one of the big challenges is, if there is a challenge for me in my business, it's making people realise that training is there to help. It's not to call people out or create a blame game. People will always walk into your training room if they've been told to go there, and in the first hour the barricade will go up. You're not going to teach me how to sell, Sonny. You're not going to make me happy. And that's part and parcel of being a trainer.
Yep.
And the skill of the trainer is to overcome that and make people feel comfortable, and the content will obviously do a lot of that. But you've got to engage people to start with. So just like in any other sales environment, it's about how you build trust. So in the same way that your business does, my business has a way of people getting involved without having to part with any cash. So they can go on the website and download a couple of chapters of the book that I've written. If they like that, they'll go and buy the book on Amazon.
Yeah, tell me about the book, Matt. I mean, what made you write the book? I know you talked about authority, and is that what was the driver?
My absolute honesty, my driver was lead generation.
Okay.
Yeah, I had no aspirations to want to be a bestseller.
There's no sex in there then?
There's a lot of failure. There's no sex in it, unfortunately. Maybe the second book.
Yeah, I'd heard that.
Sex and the Sales Guy. No, it was lead generation. Again, 2 years in, I'd realised a couple of things. The first thing, there's a lot of people out there who had a book and were using it as a mechanism for creating credibility. You and I know there's a million books out there, so why does anyone want another book? The reality is they don't. I have to say that the book's great, and I put a lot of heart and soul into it, because the second thing is, when I left corporate and I realised in day one pretty much I'd forgotten how to sell, because I'd forgotten, back to mindset again, spent 16 years practicing the same stuff every year, and none of that was helping me in the new world. So it's obvious to me why in day one, crikey, I've got to learn some new skills, or at least remind myself of some that I had before. So I kind of went back to sales school for about 6 or 9 months. I think it was Jim Rohn who famously quoted, everything that you need to prove yourself is out there, you've just got to go and find it. And if you go onto YouTube or you Google, anything to do with selling, you'll find some crap, but you'll also find some gold.
Yeah.
So I went back to sales school and developed myself for about 9 months, and I basically came up with this massive amount of intellectual property.
Yeah.
Some was other people's, and I quote other people in the book, and a lot of it was my own. So I just thought to myself, okay, let's pull that lot together. Let's also find a way of improving lead generation, because whether people like it or not, a book's a little bit better than a business card. Yeah. It's opened a lot of doors for me.
What's your book called?
It's called Sales Glue.
Sales Glue.
Sales Glue. It's the vital ingredient that makes sales success. And it effectively what it is a self-help book for salespeople. Okay. So there's a lot of sales practical advice in there, but there's also a lot of the mindset stuff as well. So if any of your listeners that are interested in things like goal setting, you'll find that in the book. But equally, we talked earlier about the numbers. If people want to know see an exercise in how you know your finite number of people you need to call each week, there's an exercise in there that does that. So it's a combination of the two worlds, really.
And they can get a couple of chapters, did you say, on your website? What's the name of the website?
Website is www.salescadence.co.uk. Okay. Go on the homepage, right down the bottom, there's a click button there. Yep. You don't have to put an email in, you click it, goes straight through to the first 2 chapters in PDF. Yep. That gives you an insight into the way that I write.
And then if you like that,
then just go on to Amazon.
Okay. And it's a physical book, not an e-book?
It's a physical book.
Good for you.
It's a physical book. So and it's quite a cathartic process actually writing a book.
Yeah, I bet you, as you were talking about going back to sales school, as you called it, you suddenly realise how much you know, don't you?
You do, and we've all got that.
Yeah.
You've got a mountain of experience in your head. I've still got book 2 in the process in my head.
Really?
But yeah, and advice to your listeners. Most of them are all going to be people who've got their own business. Well, here's a great idea. Why don't you create the book which describes your business?
Yep.
10 tips.
Yep.
You and I have got a mutual friend in Joe Gregory at Rethink,
Yeah.
who's a genius and has a wonderful process to help people who don't know how to write a book.
Yep.
I've got to be honest with you, it's as simple as it gets.
Yep.
Avoids writer's block. So if anyone's thinking to themselves, I could never write a book, I would challenge that and say, I think you can.
I'm sure you're right.
And if you engage with the experts like Joe...
Yep. They just make it easy for you.
Absolutely. And the final thing I'd say about a book is, yes, there's an investment required in both time and resource, because Joe isn't cheap, but he's not cheap for a reason, because he's bloody good at what he does.
Yeah.
But when you realise the value and benefit that comes with having a book, I mean, thousands of pounds worth of business off the back of my book, for a fraction of that in terms of investment. So do the maths.
And there's also you talked right at the beginning about mindset. And we've talked about this before in terms of psychologically there must be a lot of benefit from suddenly thinking, actually, you know what, I'm okay. I know what I'm talking about. I've got some expertise and some intellectual property. And then I'm not just somebody who's faking it, and this imposter syndrome that most of us suffer from at some point or other. It must help with all of that, mustn't it?
Yeah. Like I said, when you get sold on yourself,
yeah,
then you can
do anything. Then.
Phil M. Jones is a guy I follow. And that's his phrase. If you're not convinced, you can't convince, and that's so true, especially for people in startup phase. You go into a room, you're desperate for sales, you feel needy. If you come across as needy, you ain't going to get anywhere. And I get challenged a lot by some of the, I'd call them experienced, slightly old-fashioned sales trainers out there. I won't mention any names, but they're trying to train you to go into a room and act like you're the CEO of Reckitt Benckiser or Sky TV or General Electric, as if you don't need the sale. And I like that concept, but you don't tell me what to do. Tell me how to do it.
Yes.
And the mindset is the how. How do I go in there with so much confidence and self-belief that whilst I am desperate for the sale, I don't show it? And you have to learn that skill.
Yeah, no, that's very true. No, absolutely.
But you can. I think that the message, Neil, really is you can learn that skill.
Yes, it's a learnable skill.
Self-belief is a learnable skill.
Yep.
And so much of it, if you think about the book as an example, that book provides you with evidence that you've got some IP.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to write a book, get a piece of paper out, write down 10 things that you've achieved in the last 12 months, and you'll be staggered.
Yep.
And your list will be longer than 10 things. If that's not evidence to say you're good at stuff, then I don't know what is.
So how do people engage with you then, Matt?
Website would be the first place to go to.
salecadence.co.uk. Okay.
Again, check out the book. Go and get the chapters, and if you like that, go and buy the book.
You up for a coffee with people and a chat?
Always up for a chat with people. I think on the website I might have removed it now, but there was. So the offer is there now anyway, verbally. If you want an hour of my time, I'll call it a sales meeting. Go and get it. Ring me up. We'll either do it on Skype or we'll do it face to face here if we're in the same locality. I just want to help people.
Yeah, sure.
And an hour of my time would be the very least I could offer to any of your listeners, for sure.
Okay, that's been brilliant, Matt. And I want to finish with a final question, which I haven't primed you on. I haven't primed you on any. If you were a young man again, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give to yourself?
I'm gonna say become aware of the value of time. And the reason why I'm going to say that is I turned 50 this year.
I thought you were a lot older than that, man. Were you really?
You
50?
Can't believe you're looking at me.
Yeah.
Peter Pan. I'm benefiting from all of the years where I couldn't get into nightclubs when I was 18 and 19 years. I had baby face in those days. I'm not suggesting for a minute I look young, but
No, you don't look 50.
I'm doing okay. Time would be the thing, Neil, and the reason behind that is this: that first of all, we've all got exactly the same.
Sure.
No one's got an advantage. the advantage comes from how you spend it.
Yeah.
God knows I've wasted a lot of time in the past. You know, I've wished some time away, for crying out loud. Time is super important. It's a resource that we kind of take for granted, yet the only time we won't take it for granted is when we haven't got it. And that's quite a powerful statement to make.
It is, isn't it? It's a very good one.
And it's one that for the last 4 years since I've been involved with, performance psychology content, has really resonated with me, because it's one of the key skills that we teach. So if I could give some advice to somebody, or to my younger self, it would be just have a little bit more of a value and appreciation on time. Don't get too theoretical about it, but just make sure that when you spend it in the most wisely and beneficial way for you.
That's really good advice. Well, thank you very much indeed, Matt. What we'll have is a transcript of this podcast on the website, and a link to Matt's website as well. So urge everybody, any sales director, anybody who's interested in selling and mindset, to get in touch with Matt, because you won't go wrong. And thanks very much for listening, and goodbye.